we are part of Squid Cloud. I'm a founder. Colin is a principal developer, principal engineer. And we want to tell you a tiny bit about Squid Cloud and how it integrates with GraphQL and other services related to GraphQL, such as Asura, for example. Colin, can you go to the next slide?
Yep.
So very quickly about the team, we are a relatively small team, only 15 people, mostly ex-Googlers. So for example, I was part of Google Docs with Colin actually. I also led the Google Cloud Console team in New York. My co-founder managed about 50% of Google Cloud, so quite a team in terms of experience and application development and scalability. And actually in Google Cloud, we used GraphQL specifically to solve the problem of how to access data from multiple data sources and show them all in the same console. It was quite a big project, but that was kind of the only solution to solve such a problem, to provide the unified API on the client. Later on, we started to think of like, how can we make a solution that allow you to access the data, but also allow you to basically do a lot of what you need to achieve on the client and different backends without having a backend. So basically provide the client with a lot of capabilities in a secure way, in a scalable way, while enabling the developer to focus on the business logic without the need to do all the boilerplate code and so on. Big inspiration actually was Firebase in developing that, but we also realized that GraphQL is a big thing in that area. In general, Squid Cloud is a fully managed enterprise-grade backend as a service. We also provide AI capabilities and many other capabilities not related to accessing data or to GraphQL. In this talk, we will focus specifically about the GraphQL capabilities that we provide, but also provide kind of a glimpse about how it integrates with the rest of the infrastructure. By the way, feel free to ask any question during the talk. I know it's a new product that, I mean, we didn't really publish it. We do have a few enterprise customers already, but feel free to ask any question. Colin, next.
Yeah, it's super informal. There'll be some live demoing in a little bit too, so everyone stay on your toes for that. But yeah, Yossi, if you want to give a quick overview.
So yeah, so basically this is like a graphical description of what we provide. On the right side, you can see like the different consumer of APIs and any data manipulation, AI, and this usually are front-end applications, but it can also be other backends, other services, and so on. And on the left side, you can see what do you want to connect to. So it can be different databases, authentication provider, observability providers, different APIs, different GraphQL APIs or regular APIs or anything like that. And we basically sit here in the middle and we provide all the compute power, the scalability to run backend code provided by the user, backend code that we provide. And we basically take care of real-time updates. Think about it as Firebase, real-time update from the data sources, such as different databases and so on, to the client. But we also provide compute power that enable the user to execute different type of functions on our backend in a very unopinionated way. This is a key part of what we provide. Colin? So I would say some customers that we have right now that are using Squid. The main one, I would say, the Chicago Bulls. It's actually our first customer, Entity Global, which is a telecommunication, and Joyous, which is a medical healthcare company. All of them use actually Squid in different ways, but I mean, let's just continue.
And yeah, I can take it from
Yeah.
here. I mean, it's a pretty good overview, I think, of what we kind of offer. I think it maybe will make a little bit more sense when we kind of look at it in practice. And I'm going to demo this in a little bit so you can actually see what it's like to connect one of your GraphQL APIs to Squid, kind of how that works and some of the benefits that you get there. But essentially, the way that Squid and GraphQL are going to work is you can have a GraphQL API. So we're not really focused on building out the APIs themselves. We're more focused on connecting you to them along with other types of data sources. But if you have an existing GraphQL API and you want to use Squid, you can just drop in and add that as an integration into our current system. And then one of the big benefits is, as Yossi kind of mentioned, Squid is this middle tier. So we sort of sit in the middle between your client and your downstream data sources, like your GraphQL API. So if you need to add any kind of extra security here to who can access your endpoints, who can access data, what data they can access, you can actually write all of these security rules right inside of the Squid backend without ever having kind of to deploy your own or necessarily change your downstream API itself. And then from there, you're able to start querying your data. So kind of talking about that, the benefits here are you can add some security to your APIs. Another thing is you can proxy to internal GraphQL APIs. So say you have some APIs that are behind a firewall or can only be accessed from specific IP addresses. You're able to actually send traffic to Squid first and validate that customers are, who they say they are, that they're authenticated, that they can actually access this data. Then you could expose, your GraphQL API to Squid's IP address and actually get users through there. And effectively what these things lead to is you're able to then query your GraphQL APIs without concern from any client anywhere, kind of using the Squid SDK that we provide. Feel free to stop me or jump in if any of that doesn't make sense. But I think, again, I'll transition into a demo here, and hopefully that'll kind of give you some insight into exactly what we're talking about. So live coding demo. So who knows how things are going to go, but we'll give it a try. But this is the Squid Cloud console here. So we have kind of an organization application setup. I've created an application that's our GraphQL demo, and inside of it, it has some integrations. So say I wanted to integrate with the GraphQL API. One of my favorite ones I like to just mess around with is this really lightweight one called countries.trevorblades.com. It essentially just gives you a list of countries with names and capitals, codes, so on and so forth. Very easy and lightweight for testing. So what I would do, I would go into here. We need to add search functionality, but you can find GraphQL and we'll create an integration. We'll call this GraphQL countries. And then we just put in the base URL here. One other thing that I didn't mention, but is another aspect of security, is Squid, as I said, sort of sits in the middle of these requests. So say, this API endpoint required some API key that you didn't want to expose on your client. You could actually inject that key into these requests in the middle layer here with Squid. So that you can authenticate that users are who they say they are, and then when they request data, it has that API key, but that API key is not available on the console on the client. Anyway, we'll add this integration. So test integration looks like it's successful, and if you go through and click add integration, you actually kind of get the graphical UI in here. You can explore the schema of the integration, so on and so forth. Make some test queries. What you're actually going to find here is that if I try to query this data, I get an error message here that security rules are required. And this is because by default with Squid, when you connect integrations, they are secured. So they're not exposed to your users right away. You actually need to allow users to start to access them. That's kind of a security thing. So we have our integration created. So the question then is, how would we use it on the client? And how would we go through and secure it? So let's drop over to the code editor here. We've talked a lot about this Squid kind of middle tier backend. So this actually exists as code. There's a CLI that we have, and you can run a command to generate this project. And inside of this backend, there are a variety of services. We start with some example service here that provide functionality to kind of do these tasks that we were talking about around securing APIs and things like that. So I'm going to show you what my client app looks like, and then we'll pop back over kind of into this Squid backend service that we have running and give you a sense of kind of how we could actually add this layer of security. So I have a lightweight client app here. We have a Squid React client that we're actually using and wrapping it with our credentials here so that Squid is available to be accessed on the client side. And then inside of our app here, we're rendering a countries list component, which is essentially, this is where the meat of it, using Squid under the hood to make a request to the new GraphQL countries integration that we created with a specific GraphQL query. This is essentially the Squid syntax here. You have a Squid object that allows you to access a variety of types of integrations, GraphQL being one of them. You specify the name of the integration you've created, which would be this countries integration, and then you can run your query here. The use promise hook is a way for us to just essentially translate this async data that comes back into a format that can be used easily in React. It's effectively a wrapper that we've created around use effect. Does something very similar. I think eventually we'll probably create, first-party GraphQL hooks. This is kind of the easiest way that we handle it right now. So this will come back with data. If this request is successful, an error otherwise, and until it resolves, we'll get a loading state. So let's spin this up quickly and see what it looks like. So we can start up. This is just running Vite, by the way, so very lightweight for React here. We'll start that up, and we'll actually also start up our backend here. So this runs actually a local backend server that is Squid that we can develop against. So if I drop into here, we get something went wrong. And if we take a look, we can see that we tried to make a request to our GraphQL endpoint with the query for the countries by name, but we got security rules required because they're not secure. So if we jump back over into our backend service that we were defining as a part of Squid, we can, using these TypeScript decorators, create a function that can run any code that we want. Essentially, this runs in nodes. You can add NPM packages, so on and so forth, and effectively return a Boolean here, true if the user is allowed to access the content, false otherwise. In this specific case, we need to make sure this represents our integration ID, which was GraphQL countries. And we have now created a new security rule. You can see when I change this value, we do a little bit of a hot reload of the running server, which makes it easy for you to develop against this. So if I were to come through here and make this query, you can now see I got my full list of countries. And let's change this slightly to make this a little bit simpler. Give you a quick preview of a second step. But this is the data that you're getting back from the GraphQL API. Another thing here, so you could just go through and change, your query here. Oops. And if we refresh, you see we have all the capitals here. Now, this is kind of where the security rules get interesting. We haven't really done anything other than define true or false, right? So can you access the data? Can you not? But the benefit of Squid is we sit in the middle of this request and we get some context out of it, right? So there's a bunch of different things you could check in these security functions. One of them could be, is the user authenticated if you've integrated with an authentication provider? But to give you like a lightweight example, this is probably not the best way to do it, but we have a GraphQL context here, which includes information about the query. And this has the query inside of it, I believe, or not this context, sorry, just the regular context here as a query. And we could say, if the query includes capital, this is just the string of query, then let's say false. So let's say the users are not allowed to query for the capital. And we'll do just do if this, and then return false. And so what you'll see is if we come back over to our client and we give it a refresh, you're actually not allowed to make this query. But if we were to come through our list here and remove capital from the list and query for this, all of a sudden things work. So this is the kind of flexibility you get with Squid sitting in the middle between the client and your end GraphQL API. And I will pass that back over to Yossi to talk a little bit more about some of the functionality that we offer outside of GraphQL specifically.
Yeah, so thanks, Colin. By the way, any questions so far? I think that was quite a lot so far.
I had a question about for that GraphQL context, is the query like a plain text
Yeah,
Okay.
in that specific sense, the queries are plain text. That's why I used includes. You could, as I said, you can put any packages in there. Or you could do some decoding of it yourself and structure it in a different way. It's coming
Okay.
through exactly as it comes through in that GraphQL request when it gets serialized into the body, essentially.
Gotcha. Cool.
Anything
You
else?
mentioned
Does that?
some.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to jump over with the question there. You mentioned Hasura integration. I'm curious to know more. Is there anything special that you're doing with the Hasura integration, or is it just pulling in the GraphQL schema? Because it looks like
No, it's not special. It's just that Asura is very good in making uh, anything GraphQL available,
Yes.
which is nice. But eventually, when you want to build an application, you don't want just GraphQL. You want compute, you want executable, you want schedulers, you want webhooks, you want trigger on the data, and you
which
want
is
to
why we need
integrate.
files into the spec, right?
And yes, and you need files, and you need storage, and you need to manage deployments and CI/CD, and you need to do many other things. You need to manage secrets. You need to maybe connect to a database not through GraphQL in some cases, and you need AI on your data and to integrate AI into your system. There are many things you want to do, and I think that one of the way to benefit both from Asura and Squid and other providers is, and this is why it was super important for me when we developed Squid, is to be unopinionated. And for example, you can take whatever you have in Asura, connect it to Squid, and then now you get the benefit of Asura simplicity using GraphQL and API, but now you can integrate it into Squid, into the rest of your application, and basically benefits. The same way you would use Asura and Node.js to do many different things. With Squid, you basically don't need the Node.js layer because we take care of all of that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, interesting. We should talk more about this maybe after. I'd love to learn more about what you guys are doing.
Sure, yeah,
Yeah,
I would love to.
definitely. And yeah, Tristan, Hasura was one of the first, as I mentioned, there's the injection of the API key essentially that you might not necessarily want to expose in your client. That was one of the first integrations I tested when we built that functionality was,
Yeah.
could I connect with Hasura? Then could I
Can I pass
securely
that event
request my
secret
data?
through? And then, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It worked out great. So like, yeah, that was the kind of the cool part of kind of seeing these things come together. But yeah, as Yossi mentioned, we obviously offer these GraphQL API integrations. The security is a big benefit there. But there's a lot more that we do with Squid. And I think one of the bigger benefits of bringing your GraphQL APIs into Squid is that it then gives you flexibility to start doing some of these other things that you would normally do with a traditional backend. So I can give a quick demo that kind of extends upon the functionality that we built here, just to get a sense of other functionality that you have in Squid. And again, stop me from going too fast or if you have any questions or things like that. One of the main things that I want to call out that I didn't quite mention, I think Yossi just mentioned it though, is that Squid comes sort of like Firebase style with a built-in database. So if you do need any kind of data persistence out of the box, you don't have to spin that up and host it. We have that. We give that to you for free. So for now, we can kind of go through and I'm going to show a demo that persists some information to the built-in DB. And let's show this. So I'll give you a quick example of what this is going to look like. Essentially, instead of rendering just the list, the stringified data that we're getting back from the GraphQL API here, I'm actually rendering a countries component. And inside of this component, we're using Squid to run a query against the built-in database to check for a record in the database whose ID is equal to the name of the country. And we're grabbing the data out of this query, and then we're checking to see if the visited property on this data is present or not. And for context, what we're building here is a mechanism where you can list all the countries and star them if you visited them. So that's kind of where it's going to end up at. So that's really all you have to do to grab data out of this database. And I'll show you quickly what that looks like in the app now. Let's give it a refresh. So here you can see a bunch of countries that are starred. And I've actually, gone through and tested this a little bit, which is why 4 of these are already starred. If you were to go through and star another one, you can see there's a mutate request that gets issued here. This goes up to the Squid DB. The mutation is allowed because, back to these kind of security rules, we have allowed all access to the built-in database to be true. Back to securing data in other ways. If I were to do this, this should, if it restarts, come through as disallowed. Let's verify that. There you go. Perfect.
Colin, can you open 2 tabs in parallel?
Yes,
Sure.
I was about to do that. So as Yossi mentioned, one of the other benefits that we talked about earlier about Squid is real-time updates. Well, we don't do this for GraphQL with subscriptions, although it's something that we are looking to dive deeper into. We do this with data sources, specifically databases. So if you were to have 2 tabs open out of the box by default, if you star on one, let me make sure that I save my sync. Let me make sure I save my security rules here, and we'll give it a refresh on both. There we go, star on one, there you go, perfect. So you can see in both tabs, you get the real-time update kind of persisted across. And yes, these are running on the same client, but the actual update is coming through this server here. So this is not just like a local change. This is across the board here. So yeah, and the way that this is working is, you know, when you click on the button, what we do is we get the same collection here, this countries collection. We insert or get a document reference. This is the ID of the document, which should be the name. And we insert / upsert, you know, the data about whether the country has been visited or not. So this is essentially pairing your GraphQL API data, which is the list of countries, with some additional data that you're storing out of the box in the Squid built-in database. And there's a few other functionalities that we can show with the backend here. So as Yossi mentioned, in addition to just security rules and executable functions, we have things like triggers. So a trigger is something that would fire when data within a database changes. So here we're looking at the countries collection, and essentially we're looking at the after result of a mutation and grabbing the name of the country, which is the ID, and visited out of it. And if I were to come here and change Angola to no longer visited, you should see a log here, no longer visited Angola. I think that's spelled wrong. And if you came back to Antarctica, you'd see that we visited Antarctica. So this is a backend that right now is running locally, but it's something you can deploy. We have a simple deploy command, and then this would be up and running, and users would be able to kind of, you know, this functionality would be there without you having to write and maintain your own backend. One other feature to showcase would be webhooks. Similar to being able to define triggers, we have an easy way to be able to define webhooks. And the ID here is actually ends up being the actual webhook, part of the webhook URL here. You see when I added a webhook, I now got a printout about the available one. All this does is in your backend, you also have access to this Squid instance. It takes the collection of countries, queries them, filters by ones that you visited, dereferences them, which means that you get the raw data, and prints them out mapping to the name of the country. And you can see now, if I come here and visit this webhook, I get the list of countries. If I visit a few more, like Belgium, Canada, Grenada, Ireland, I should have all of my logs from my trigger that was firing. And if I refresh my webhook, you can see all the countries are in there. So this is essentially a way to spin out and generate a lot of backend functionality that handles a variety of different use cases without kind of ever having to maintain and, you know, deploy the DevOps and plumbing and backend side of this yourself.
Yeah.
Any questions on that?
Maybe one more comment. So as I said before, we really want development to be simple, and I think one of the benefits is, like, first it integrates with many things such as GraphQL, but eventually it reduces a lot of bureaucracy and DevOps. The idea is to make the front-end developer kind of like a full-stack developer, because it's all TypeScript. You execute something on your client, and you also want to write a security rule or scheduler or trigger or webhook. There are many more functionalities that Colin didn't show, but for example, secret management, you can expose Swagger API. We actually have on the roadmap to also expose GraphQL API. And basically a lot of this type of functionality. One of the big part of functionality that we are not going to demo today is actually AI. We can extract insights from databases and also integrate it as part of the regular workflow. So for example, you could ask questions about this internal database quite easily. We have data browser in the console, so you can kind of see what's going on there. And yeah, I mean, I can speak a lot about the different feature, but I think the idea of making the development significantly simpler while integrating with everything else in unopinionated ways, that's the main part of what we are trying to provide here.
Awesome. Hopefully a lot of that made sense. I know it's sort of fast on the demo front. But any other questions on that, whether it's related to the GraphQL integrations we provide or Squid itself?
I had a question. Where does Squid run? Like if it sits in between the eyeball and the
Sure. So when you develop locally, as Colin showed, we have a fully local development environment that runs on your machine. But when you deploy, you can choose what cloud and what region you want to deploy it on. It's basically a cloud service by itself. So we run on AWS, Azure, GCP, and I don't know if it's related to this scope, but we do have on the roadmap to be on-prem.
Cool. And is it typically deployed to one region, or is there like multi-region?
Yes. So I mean, you can easily achieve multi-region by creating two different applications and then initialize two Squid instances and decide which one to connect. But similar to, we took the approach that AWS takes, that every service is regional, and if you want to use two, just use two different APIs.
Oh, I see. Okay, cool.
Awesome. Anyone else? Cool. We got a few, these will be in the recording as well, but if you're interested in joining our Discord or if you want to come out and demo it, we got a few links / QR codes here that we can always send around. And with that, yeah, thanks everybody. Hope that was useful.